The evening had always been a predictable part of Jake's routine. He didn't mind it. In fact, it was a comfort. A little dinner at 7, the dishes by 7:30, then a quick check on the news before bed. That was his life, neatly laid out. But tonight was different. It wasn't the kind of different that makes you immediately nervous. It was subtle. The silence that enveloped the house felt heavier than usual. He'd gotten used to the quiet since his daughter, Lily, moved back home temporarily. At 24, she was an independent woman. She didn't require much attention. Most days, she spent her time in her room, either working or catching up with friends online. Jake hardly noticed her presence. They'd gotten into the rhythm of living under the same roof again, but with a comfortable distance. Tonight, however, that rhythm would break. Carrying a basket of laundry upstairs, Jake caught a faint, soothing sound coming from the end of the hallway. It was a hum. It came from the bathroom, and there was something oddly inviting about it. At first, Jake dismissed it, thinking it was just Lily taking another one of her long showers. He shook his head and continued his climb, still holding the basket of freshly folded clothes. But then, the humming stopped. A chill ran down Jake's spine as his footsteps faltered. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, steam seeping into the hallway. The tune had shifted, more like a whisper now, echoing faintly into the still air of the house. Something was different. He couldn't quite place it. Normally, Lily would have been in there with the door locked, headphones in, lost in her world. But this time, the melody sounded lighter, more carefree. Jake stood in front of the bathroom door, unsure of whether to knock or just go about his business. But curiosity got the better of him. Nudging the door with his elbow, he expected it to creak shut, but instead, it swung open, revealing a scene he hadn't expected. Lily was standing there in the shower, her back to the door. Her face was calm, focused. She was humming that same tune, lost in her own rhythm, unaware of Jake standing just a few feet away. He shouldn't have looked, he knew that. But he couldn't tear his eyes away. The humming seemed to pull him in, almost as if it had a hold on him. It wasn't just the song. It was the way Lily stood there, her movements almost hypnotic. Jake's heart skipped a beat as a strange feeling washed over him. He knew it was wrong. It was her private space. He should leave. But as if drawn by an invisible force, he stepped closer. A creaking floorboard beneath his foot broke the stillness like a gunshot. The music stopped instantly. Lily froze. "Dad?" she called, her voice wavering with confusion. Jake's heart hammered in his chest. Panic surged as he grabbed the laundry basket with trembling hands and bolted down the hallway. His head spun with guilt. He hadn't meant to intrude. He hadn't meant to cross a line. But something inside him couldn't help it. Slamming his bedroom door behind him, Jake leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath. He couldn't shake the image of her standing there, the innocence of the moment shattered by his intrusion. And for the first time in years, Jake felt truly ashamed. The morning sunlight filtered gently through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. Jake sat at the kitchen table, his coffee mug untouched. The events of the previous night played on a loop in his mind. He kept seeing Lily in the bathroom, hearing her soft hum. How could he have let that happen? His mind was clouded with guilt, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the worst part wasn't what he'd done. It was the silence that followed. Lily was already at the kitchen table, a toast in one hand and her phone in the other. She didn't acknowledge him at first, her eyes fixed on the screen. For a moment, Jake wondered if the entire incident had slipped her mind. Maybe she hadn't even noticed him standing there. Maybe she had just gone on with her life. But then she spoke. "Morning," Lily said, glancing up for a second before returning her attention to her phone. "Morning?" Jake replied, his voice barely audible. The words felt hollow, The air in the room thickened. The tension was palpable, like a weight pressing down on both of them. Jake could feel the suffocating silence that had settled between them, and he hated it. He wanted to ask if she was okay, to apologize, but the words were caught in his throat. What could he even say? He couldn't undo what had happened. Lily broke the silence. "You were in the hallway last night, weren't you?" Jake's breath caught in his chest. His heart pounded against his ribs, and he could feel the heat rising in his face. She hadn't let it go. She knew. He could feel the accusation hanging in the air, thick and unspoken, as if every word she spoke had a deeper meaning. Yeah, I was," Jake stammered, shifting in his seat. "I was just putting away some laundry." Lily didn't look up from her phone, but Jake could feel her gaze lingering on him, even though she wasn't really looking at him. "Did you see anything?" she asked casually, but there was an underlying tension in her voice. The question was simple, but it felt loaded. Jake's stomach churned. What could he say? Lying felt wrong, but the truth felt even worse. He cleared his throat, trying to sound casual. "No, I didn't see anything. I just heard you humming and figured you were busy, so I left." Lily didn't respond immediately. She continued scrolling on her phone, her expression unreadable. Jake held his breath, waiting for her to say something, anything. But she just nodded slowly, as if she was accepting his answer, or maybe just choosing not to press further. The conversation ended there, but the silence between them lingered like an unspoken agreement. For the rest of the morning, Jake felt like he was walking on eggshells around Lily. He kept his distance, avoiding eye contact, hoping that she'd let it go and that things would somehow return to normal. But deep down, he knew the truth. Things had already changed. The day passed in a haze. Jake went through the motions of his usual routine, checking emails, making a few calls, and trying to focus on work. But his mind kept wandering back to the awkward exchange with Lily. The guilt weighed on him like a stone in his chest. It wasn't just the incident last night. It was the silence that followed, the invisible wall that had sprung up between them. How had they gone from being so comfortable with each other to this? Jake couldn't stop thinking about it. Every little thing felt off now, like a quiet tension was hanging in the air. Even the smallest interactions felt strained, like they were both waiting for something to crack. He wasn't sure how much longer they could keep pretending that everything was fine. By late afternoon, the house felt unbearably quiet again. It was the kind of silence that gnawed at you, like something unsaid was hanging just out of reach. Jake couldn't stand it anymore. He needed to break the tension somehow. A family movie night. That's what they needed. Something simple, something that would make them feel like a family again. It had been so long since they'd done something like that. Maybe this would help them reset, remind them of the normalcy they used to have. He knocked on Lily's door, hoping she'd be up for it. "Hey, Lily, how about a movie tonight? I'll make some popcorn," he suggested. There was a long pause before Lily responded. "Sure," she said, her voice flat and unenthusiastic. Jake felt a pang of disappointment, but he didn't show it. It wasn't a no, at least. That was something. He headed to the kitchen to prepare, trying to ignore the knot in his stomach. Later that evening, they settled onto the couch. The movie was lighthearted, something he thought would be easy to watch and take their minds off things. But as the film played, Jake couldn't help but notice the awkwardness still lingering between them. Lily sat with her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the screen, but her mind seemed miles away. Jake tried to focus on the movie, but every joke, every scene that would have usually made him laugh felt hollow. He could tell Lily wasn't paying attention either. It was like they were both going through the motions, neither of them fully present. Halfway through the movie, Jake noticed Lily glance at her phone. Her expression was distant, her thumb scrolling absent-mindedly. It was clear her mind wasn't on the movie, and Jake couldn't help but wonder if she was thinking about the same thing he was. Was the tension still there for her? Or was he just overthinking it? "Everything okay?" Jake asked cautiously, breaking the silence. Lily shrugged, not looking up from her phone. "Yeah, just tired, I guess." Jake could tell it was a lie. He didn't press further. They both knew something wasn't right, but neither of them seemed willing to address it. The rest of the movie passed in awkward silence, the jokes falling flat, the air thick with unspoken words. When the credits finally rolled, Jake looked over at Lily. She was staring blankly at the TV, her body language stiff, distant. "Did you like the movie?" Jake asked, hoping for some kind of response, anything to break the wall between them. Lily didn't look at him. "It was fine," she replied, her voice flat. Jake sighed inwardly, the disappointment settling deep in his chest. He had hoped the movie night would help, but it seemed like it had only made things worse. The silence between them felt louder than the film had been. Lily stood up abruptly, grabbing her phone and heading toward the stairs. "I'm gonna head to bed," she said, barely glancing at Jake. "Thanks for the movie, though." Jake watched her go, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the empty house. He felt a knot in his stomach tighten, a deep sense of failure washing over him. He hadn't been able to fix it. The awkwardness, the distance, it was still there, stronger than ever. He stayed on the couch for a long time after Lily went to her room, replaying the evening in his mind. What had gone wrong? Was it the movie? The forced conversation? Or was it something deeper, something neither of them was willing to confront? Jake eventually turned off the TV and cleaned up the popcorn bowls, the emptiness of the house pressing in on him. As he stood in the darkened living room, he realized that the silence between them had become the loudest thing in the house. The following day, Jake tried to convince himself that things had improved, that it was just a temporary bump in their relationship. But deep down, he knew it wasn't true. The moment he stepped into the kitchen that morning, the weight of the silence hit him again. It was impossible to ignore now. The invisible wall between them was growing taller with each passing hour. Lily was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in front of her. She didn't acknowledge him at first, her eyes glued to her phone. It was the same routine, but the familiarity felt strained now. Jake stood by the counter, his heart heavy. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to bridge the gap. "Morning," he said, his voice sounding weaker than he intended. Lily glanced up briefly, offering a quiet "morning," before returning to her phone. The lack of eye contact, the lack of anything real, it felt like they were just two strangers sharing the same space. Jake's mind raced. How had they gotten here? How had this normal father-daughter relationship turned into something so uncomfortable? He didn't understand it. He didn't know how to fix it. He grabbed a mug and poured himself a cup of coffee, trying to settle into the morning. But it was hard to focus. His mind kept returning to the conversation from the night before. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, and it wasn't something that could easily be fixed. As the hours passed, the unease only grew. Every interaction felt like a minefield. Jake was afraid to speak, afraid to make things worse. Lily didn't seem interested in talking either. She spent most of the day in her room, only emerging briefly to grab something to eat before retreating back into her own space. It was like they were living in separate worlds under the same roof. By late afternoon, Jake couldn't take it anymore. The tension was suffocating, and he was desperate for things to change. He needed to do something, anything, to break through the cold distance that had formed between them. Maybe if they could just sit down and talk, they could work through this awkwardness. Maybe if he admitted his mistake, if he apologized, they could find a way back to where they used to be. He knocked on Lily's door, unsure of what to expect. When she opened it, She didn't look at him immediately. Her eyes were focused on the floor, her posture tense. "Lily, can we talk?" Jake asked, his voice filled with the kind of hesitation that came from someone afraid to face the truth. Lily didn't respond right away. She stepped back from the door, allowing him in. As Jake entered, he could feel the weight of her unspoken thoughts in the room. There was something different about her demeanor now, something that felt even more distant than before. "About last night," Jake started, unsure how to continue. Lily didn't meet his gaze. "It's fine," she said, her voice flat. "Really, it's not a big deal." Jake's heart sank. "It is a big deal," he said quietly. "I crossed a line, and I need to own up to it." Lily remained silent, and the room felt even smaller. Jake stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. He had hoped for some kind of opening, a chance to fix things. But instead, it felt like they were standing at the edge of something they couldn't fix, something that was beyond their control. "I don't want this to be weird between us," Jake continued, his voice filled with sincerity. "I want us to be able to talk, to be comfortable again." Lily finally looked up, her eyes meeting his for the first time in what felt like forever. There was a flicker of something in her gaze, frustration, maybe, or sadness, but it was quickly replaced by a guarded expression. "I don't know if I can just forget it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just about what happened last night, Dad. It's everything. It's like we don't even know how to be around each other anymore." Jake's chest tightened. He had hoped to ease the tension, but now it felt like it had only grown stronger. The weight of her words was suffocating, and for a moment, he didn't know how to respond. "I don't know how to fix it, Lily," Jake admitted, his voice cracking with emotion. "I really don't. But I want to try." Lily's gaze softened slightly, but she still didn't say anything. The silence between them stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. Jake's heart pounded in his chest, the weight of their fractured relationship pressing down on him. After what felt like an eternity, Lily spoke again, her voice quieter now. "I need space, Dad. I don't know how to explain it, but I need some time to figure things out." Jake nodded slowly, his heart sinking even further. He understood, even if it hurt. Maybe this was what they needed. Maybe giving each other space was the only way to heal. "Okay," Jake said softly. "I get it. Take the time you need." Lily nodded and turned away, heading back to her room. Jake stood there for a long moment, his heart heavy in his chest. He had no idea where this was going, or if they could ever truly fix what was broken. But one thing was certain: things would never be the same. The following days felt like an endless stretch of uncomfortable silence. Jake respected Lily's request for space, but it didn't make it any easier. The house seemed emptier now, as though every corner echoed with unspoken words. They passed each other occasionally, but their interactions were brief, polite, and strained. Jake had spent most of his time in his home office, trying to bury himself in work. But the thoughts of Lily kept creeping in. He couldn't shake the feeling that things were slipping through his fingers, that the distance between them was widening by the day. He couldn't even remember the last time they had had a real conversation, the kind that didn't feel awkward or forced. He missed her, in a way that was hard to put into words. The comfortable silence of their past had turned into a painful one. Lily, on the other hand, seemed to be retreating further into herself. She stayed in her room most of the time, only coming downstairs when necessary. Her phone was practically glued to her hand, and her expressions were harder to read than ever. She wasn't angry, but there was something in her eyes, something that said she wasn't okay, that she was holding on to something. Jake knew he had to do something. He couldn't let this distance between them continue. He had to fix things. But where did he even start? It was late one evening when Lily finally approached him. She stood in the doorway of his office, her posture hesitant, as though she wasn't sure whether to speak or retreat. Jake looked up from his desk, his heart leaping in his chest. "Can we talk?" Lily asked, her voice quieter than usual. Jake nodded, gesturing for her to sit. The tension in the room was thick, but at least they were finally going to address the elephant in the room. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew it couldn't stay this way. Lily sat down slowly, her eyes focused on the floor as she gathered her thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, her voice low and measured. "About everything that's been going on. About last night." Jake's heart clenched. "Lily, I'm so sorry. I never should have—" "No," she interrupted, shaking her head. "I'm not mad at you, Dad. It's not just about that. It's everything. It's the way things have felt for the past few months. It's like we're both walking on eggshells around each other." Jake swallowed, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. This was the conversation he'd been dreading, but he knew it was necessary. "I know," he said quietly. "I've been avoiding it too. I thought if I just ignored it, things would get better. But they didn't. I know I've messed up." Lily looked up at him then, her expression softening slightly. "It's not just about you. I haven't been the best daughter either. I've been distant, and I know that's made things harder. But I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to make it better." Jake felt a flicker of hope. "We can figure this out together, Lily. I don't know how, but I'm willing to try. We have to talk more, really talk, not just pretend everything's fine." Lily nodded slowly. "I guess I've been scared," she admitted. "Scared that things wouldn't go back to normal. Scared that we couldn't fix it." The vulnerability in her voice hit Jake harder than he expected. He reached across the table, his hand resting on hers. "We can fix it," he said firmly, more to reassure himself than her. "It won't be easy, but we'll work through it." For the first time in a long while, Lily smiled. A small, unsure smile. But it was enough. It felt like a crack in the wall that had been between them. A crack they could begin to rebuild from. They sat in silence for a while after that, neither of them quite knowing what to say next. But it was a different silence than before. It wasn't suffocating. It wasn't full of guilt or shame. It was a quiet that held the possibility of healing. "I don't want to pretend anymore," Lily finally said. "I want to talk, really talk. I don't want this distance between us." Jake's heart swelled with relief. "Neither do I," he replied softly. "We'll take it one step at a time, okay?" Lily nodded. "Okay." It wasn't a miracle, not by any means, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long while, Jake felt like they might just be able to fix what was broken between them. The days after their conversation felt different. There was no instant transformation, no sudden resolution. But there was a shift. A subtle, yet important one. Jake and Lily began to talk more. Not about anything monumental at first, just small conversations that felt more genuine than they had in weeks. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Jake still felt the weight of the past week hanging over him, but it didn't feel as suffocating anymore. They were starting to repair the cracks, and that in itself was a relief. It didn't make everything magically better, but it was a start. One afternoon, Jake decided to take a step that felt right. He invited Lily out for a walk. They hadn't spent time together like this in a while, not since everything started to feel off. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a walk through the nearby park, something simple that wouldn't feel forced. It was his way of showing her that he was willing to meet her halfway, to do something small that might help bring them closer. Lily had hesitated at first. She was still recovering from the strain in their relationship, still feeling the weight of everything that had happened. But after a few minutes of quiet hesitation, she agreed. They left the house together, walking side by side in the cool afternoon air. It felt unfamiliar at first, like stepping back into a world that had once been comfortable, but now felt a little awkward. They didn't talk much at first. It was just the sound of their footsteps on the gravel path, the occasional rustling of leaves in the trees above. But there was something reassuring about it. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people walking, slowly rebuilding the connection they had lost. "I've missed this," Jake said after a while, his voice low but sincere. "It's been too long since we've done something simple like this." Lily glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "Yeah, me too. I've been so caught up in everything that I forgot how nice it could be." Jake nodded. "I know what you mean. I think we both lost sight of the simple things. We let everything else get in the way." The words hung in the air between them, both acknowledging the truth without saying it outright. It wasn't just the incident in the hallway that had caused the rift. It was the way they had both started to distance themselves, to retreat into their own worlds without realizing how far apart they were becoming. As they continued to walk, the conversations slowly began to flow more naturally. They talked about small things at first: the weather, a funny video Lily had seen online, the book Jake had been reading. It wasn't deep or intense, but it didn't need to be. For the first time in a while, they were just talking, and that was enough. By the time they returned home, there was a noticeable change in the air. It wasn't a dramatic shift, but it was there. The heaviness that had lingered in the house had lifted just a little. The space between them wasn't as wide as it had been before. It was still there, still fragile, but it wasn't as overwhelming. That night, they sat down for dinner together, something they hadn't done in a while. The meal was simple, nothing fancy, just a casual dinner like the ones they used to have all the time. And for the first time in weeks, it felt normal, comfortable. "I'm glad we did this," Lily said softly, glancing up from her plate. "It feels better." Jake smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. "Me too. I think we're on the right track." It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of awkwardness, still things they hadn't fully addressed. But it was a step in the right direction, and that was enough for Jake. For the first time in a long while, he felt like maybe, just maybe, they could fix this. One conversation, one step at a time. The days that followed their walk were filled with small, steady improvements. Jake and Lily had found a new rhythm, one that felt a little more natural, though still a bit fragile. But while the surface seemed calmer, Jake knew there was still a lot left unspoken between them. The guilt, the misunderstandings, it had all built up over time, and even though they were making progress, he could sense that neither of them had fully addressed what had been bothering them for so long. It was Friday evening when the moment finally came. Jake was sitting on the couch, flipping through a book when Lily came downstairs. She seemed hesitant, as if she was carrying something heavy with her, a question or a thought that had been weighing on her. "Dad, can we talk?" she asked, standing at the edge of the living room. Jake set the book down, immediately sensing the shift in her tone. This was it, the conversation they had both been avoiding, the one that would finally address the deeper cracks in their relationship. "Of course, Lily," Jake said, gesturing for her to sit. "What's on your mind?" Lily took a seat on the couch beside him, her hands folded in her lap. There was an air of nervousness about her, but also a determination, like she knew it was time to say what had been left unsaid for too long. "Everything's just felt so off," Lily started, her voice quiet. "I mean, we've been trying to fix things, and I appreciate that. I really do. But I don't think either of us has fully talked about what happened. Not just the night of the shower, but everything leading up to that. It's like we've been skirting around it, pretending things were fine when they weren't." Jake's heart sank. He had feared this moment. They had been putting bandages over wounds without truly allowing themselves to heal. But now, it was time to confront everything. The unspoken frustration, the distance, the missed opportunities for connection. "I know," Jake said softly, his voice laced with regret. "I've been avoiding it too. I thought maybe if we just got back to normal, everything would fall into place. But it doesn't work like that, does it?" Lily shook her head. "Number, it doesn't. I think I've been holding on to a lot of things too. Things that happened even before that night. And I never really realized how much they were affecting me until now." Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. He hadn't realized there were things she hadn't said, things that had been quietly festering. He had been so focused on his own guilt and shame that he hadn't given her the space to voice her own struggles. "What do you mean?" Jake asked, his voice gentle but filled with concern. Lily took a deep breath before continuing, her eyes fixed on the floor. "I don't know. It's just, ever since Mom passed, I've felt like I've been holding this weight. I never really dealt with it, and it just affected everything. I guess I thought if I kept my distance, it would make it easier, but it hasn't. It's just made everything worse." Jake's heart broke at the sound of her words. He had known Lily had been struggling since her mother's death, but hearing it laid out like that hit him harder than he had anticipated. He had been so focused on trying to keep things stable that he hadn't realized how much she had been carrying on her own. "I didn't know you felt like that, Lil," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have been there more for you, should have seen it. But I was so wrapped up in my own worries that I didn't pay attention." Lily finally met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "I don't blame you, Dad. I think I didn't know how to reach out. I didn't know how to tell you that I needed help. And then, with everything else going on, I just kept pushing you away. I thought it would make it easier. But it didn't." Jake reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "I'm so sorry, Lily. I should have been more open with you too. I should have seen the signs." They sat there for a long moment, the silence between them no longer uncomfortable, but filled with an understanding that had been missing for so long. They both realized how much they had missed, how much they had avoided. It wasn't just the single incident. It was the years of quiet pain, of unspoken words, of misunderstandings. "We can fix this," Jake said, his voice steady but full of hope. "But we need to keep talking, keep being honest with each other. No more holding back." Lily nodded, her expression softening. "I agree. I think I can start healing now, knowing that I'm not alone in this." Jake squeezed her hand, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. For the first time in a long while, he truly believed that they were on the path to healing. It wouldn't be easy, but they had finally broken through the barriers that had kept them apart. They had faced the past, and now they could look forward to the future. The following weeks were filled with small, meaningful changes. It wasn't an immediate fix. It wasn't even a smooth ride, but the road to healing was becoming clearer, one conversation at a time. Jake and Lily had begun to rebuild the trust that had been fractured, piece by piece. They spent more time together, just the two of them, and each time they did, the weight of the past seemed to get a little lighter. Jake knew the journey ahead wouldn't be without its challenges. There would still be moments of tension, moments where old wounds reopened, but he felt more hopeful than he had in months. The foundation was being laid for something better, something that could last. They weren't there yet, but they were moving forward. One afternoon, a month after their heart-to-heart conversation, Jake found himself sitting on the back porch, sipping his coffee and watching the sun dip below the horizon. He had always enjoyed this time of day, the quiet moments when everything seemed to slow down. As he sat there, he reflected on how much had changed in such a short period of time. Lily had come a long way since the days when she first moved back home. She was still working through her grief, still finding her way, but she had opened up more than he ever thought possible. Jake had learned to be more present, more aware of the small moments, the things that truly mattered. The little things, like sitting together on the porch, just enjoying each other's company, had become more meaningful than anything else. As if on cue, Lily stepped onto the porch, her presence a quiet comfort. She had been spending more time with her friends lately, finally beginning to find her balance. But tonight, she chose to sit with him. She had always been independent, but in the past few weeks, they had started to reconnect in a way that felt natural. Real. She had become a little less distant, and Jake was learning how to give her the space she needed while still being there when she needed him. Lily sat down next to him, not saying anything at first. It was the kind of silence they had always shared before. Comfortable, warm. A silence that no longer felt heavy. "I'm really proud of you," Jake said after a long pause, his voice soft. Lily turned to look at him, her face a mixture of surprise and appreciation. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Jake continued, "I've watched you. You've been really strong through all of this. I know it hasn't been easy for you, but you've kept going. And I'm proud of you." Lily smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot." They sat together in silence again, the quiet of the evening wrapping around them like a comforting blanket. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. They were learning to be there for each other in ways they hadn't before. They were healing, slowly but surely. "I think we're getting better at this," Lily said finally, breaking the silence. "Talking, listening, being here for each other." Jake nodded. "Yeah, I think so too. It's a process, but we're making progress." Lily leaned back in her chair, staring up at the stars that had begun to appear in the darkening sky. "It's nice, you know? Having you around, just not feeling so alone anymore." Jake felt a lump form in his throat. "You're never alone, Lily. You never have been, and you never will be." She smiled again, this time with a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. The past was still there, lingering in the background, but it didn't have the same hold on them. They had faced it together, and now they could look ahead. They didn't need to have all the answers. They didn't need to fix everything in one go. What mattered was that they were finally on the same page, that they were building something stronger than before. And as they sat there, side by side, Jake realized that they had already begun to heal. They weren't the same people they had been when they started this journey, and that was okay. They didn't need to be. What mattered was that they were moving forward, together.